because the devil's been in the signs and wonders game since time immemorial, and people are simple-minded. And so if I can produce for you a glowing, shiny marble, or in this case a blessed handkerchief, or speaking a language you might know, it may be or it may not be legitimate. And I think people are getting deceived. And the only gradient we have for analyzing anything is the Scripture of God. It's like a chemist in a lab. He puts it through the supreme filter. If it gets through, it's okay. But if it's a new revelation or a more advanced revelation, or if it's contradictory to the Scripture, have nothing to do with it at all.
Growing up in India, I saw firsthand how the Hindu belief system greatly contributed to the poverty and suffering of India. I remember seeing the very poor giving their last bowl of rice to a sacred cow. I remember seeing the more well-to-do offering large amounts of food to wooden idols while children starved to death just a few feet away. All the while, gurus were living in their palatial mansions, compelling their followers into turning over their possessions to them.
According to the Guru Gita, one of Hinduism's most important scriptures, the follower must not only adore and worship the Guru as God, but surrender himself and all his possessions as well.
Most of the gurus that I know of in the West are super rich. Gurus are more interested in white disciples than in Indian disciples, largely because they get more money from the whites.
Rob, former transcendental meditator for 13 years, was a TM governor and in charge of teacher training at Maharishi International University.
The TM movement is very wealthy. They have land holdings all over the world. They have beautiful hotels in Switzerland. They have university campuses in the Midwest. They have academies on the East Coast, the West Coast.
Here he was getting served on silver plates 6 times a day, sleeping on a very soft bed, riding around in a Mercedes. But supposedly he was so renounced that he wasn't attached to these things, so that gave him a right to enjoy them.
Maharishi made a statement that says, when the money comes to me, he says it's transcendental.
Money is our last priority. Everything else is our first priority.
Hundreds of gurus have grown incredibly rich in the West through tax-exempt donations and the manufacture and distribution of every kind of memorabilia honoring these self-proclaimed God-men. They have acquired vast land holdings, armed bodyguards, and outrageous luxuries, from posh hotels to their own fleets of planes, helicopters, and, as in Rajneesh's case, Rolls-Royces.
Why not Rolls-Royces? Why have anything less? This country is a capitalist country, and anything that produces or helps capitalism, why not? Anybody who says, why have Rolls-Royce? I say, you're a communist.
The guru's hypocrisy is diabolical, criticizing the materialism and commercialism in the West and convincing their followers that non-materialism will get them up the spiritual ladder. These gods of the New Age are laughing all the way to the bank. I know of groups involved in drug trafficking, smuggling, prostitution, and the buying and selling of weapons, all done to earn money for the guru.
I know of a variety of female disciples who were prostitutes in Bombay and making money with it.
I have evidence that the Rajneesh organization is making a lot of their income through illegal trafficking of drugs into this country.
If you have your head in a right place, you can create money. It is an art.
They were encouraged to smuggle dope from India to Europe, and from this money they could pay their workshops.
If they have to tell you they're with the Christian Children's Fund, or they're with the Salvation Army, or they're using the money to find men missing in action in Vietnam, whatever they have to do to get the money, they'll do that because they believe what their guru told them, that the end justifies the means.
Hinduism teaches you to die to the voice of conscience inside that says it's wrong. It teaches that there is no sin. This can be seen in the way that gurus and their disciples justify murder, violence, robbery, bribery, and crooked business transactions, all done in the name of heavenly deception.
People were encouraged not only to spy on each other when they were not properly surrendering to the master, people were encouraged to lie to each other. The mail is censored. We know of bribery with local politicians. People undergo, as I did, a change in their value system and become confused about what is right and what is wrong.
Another danger that you can see in a lot of the Eastern thinking is the sort of syncretism and the failure to make distinctions so that you transcend not just right and wrong, but this and that. And I think it's very important to say there are distinctions, not just between right and wrong, but in all sorts of things, to think critically, to think clearly.
The whole philosophy of Hinduism is very relative. There are no absolute moral standards upon which to act. Your feeling of right or wrong would change according to your level of consciousness.
You can become so completely under the power of this particular person that you refuse to think, or if you like, you're unable to think. You can lose the power to take decisions of any sort, no matter how trifling, in any area of your life.
Sally Belfridge, former resident of Rajneesh's religious community in India, wrote of her disillusionment in her book, Flowers of Emptiness.
I felt more and more kind of drawn into this emptiness of his. It's impossible to describe. It's more than charisma. Charisma doesn't do it justice at all. It's more than an aura. I really believe that he knew something I didn't, that he was on a plane that I was not.
They ask you for total and also brainless obedience and worship because they are God and they are more than human, and you have to follow these gods. You are not asked to deal with your brain and to ask questions.
I discover with amazement and dismay the readiness of people to submit.
So many people in the world feel that they've got to fling themselves headlong and believe and give up their autonomy.
People love to give up this heavy freedom that we have to carry with all the decisions and the effort it implies.
Freedom in the East is freedom from individuality. So it's a detached freedom that has no high place of man. And a lot of the Eastern way of thinking is like a sort of mist that folds in, or it's been described as an embrace that smothers any differences.
I found that I lost my identity somehow. He had no identity. He was a sort of conduit to the infinite. And I was somehow at the receiving end of something very strange and extraordinary.
There is something within man that drives him to worship. It's sort of like Bob Dylan said, you've got to serve somebody. And if you do not serve God, you must then have a substitute. And this is exactly what is being offered to man today. Substitutes for the true God. And because man is driven to worship, he is drawn many times to these substitutes. Unfortunately, in the church today, there are many churches that do deny the power of God. And people are looking for reality and power. And thus they are drawn to these Eastern mystical experiences where there is that promise of power. Paul speaks of men who, because they did not receive the truth of God, God brought to them a strong delusion that they would believe a lie rather than the truth. It's amazing to me what people will believe when they've rejected the truth of God. And surely we have observed today absurd beliefs of men, believing that man is God or can become God, and the denying of the reality of God. But in the final analysis, the worship of God, the true and the living God, will bring a man into a glorious liberty where the worship of these false gods will only bring you into bondage.